The dog didn't growl at her. That was the first thing Wren noticed. Except Wren was already on the list, so scratch that. The dog didn't growl at her. That was the first thing Lena noticed, except Lena was on the list too. Let me start over, the right way. The dog didn't growl at her. Every other person in that waiting room had taken one look at the animal and stepped back. The receptionist had called Dr. Harrington, also on the list, from behind the front desk, without moving closer. The other vet tech on duty that night, a 22-year-old named Brandon who'd been on the job for 4 months, had actually pressed himself against the far wall and stayed there. But when Maren Solís walked through the door from the back hallway, clipboard in hand, the Belgian Malinois lifted its head and went still. Not aggressive still, not coiled to strike still, just still, watching her. Maren was 31 years old. She had a coffee stain on the left cuff of her scrubs that she'd noticed at 7 that morning and stopped caring about by 8. She wore her dark hair pulled back in a way that wasn't quite a bun and wasn't quite a ponytail. Something functional that she'd stopped giving a name to somewhere around year 3 of overnight shifts. She had the kind of face that people trusted without knowing why. Open, unhurried, with dark eyes that had seen enough to know the difference between an animal that wanted to hurt someone and an animal that was simply afraid. The Malinois was afraid. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, in the way his ribs expanded too fast, in how his eyes kept tracking back to the man holding his leash even when he was looking at her. The dog wasn't aggressive. The dog was terrified and exhausted and in pain, and he was looking at her the way animals sometimes did, with that specific wordless question that Maren had never been able to explain to anyone who hadn't seen it themselves. "Are you safe?" "Don't come any closer," the man said. His name, she would later learn, was Staff Sergeant Doyle Hatch. He was 38, broad through the shoulders in the way that came from decades of physical work, and not from a gym, with a jaw set so tight it looked like it had been carved that way. He wore civilian clothes, dark jeans, a gray long sleeve pushed up to the elbows, but he stood the way military men stood, weight distributed, back straight, taking up exactly the space he'd decided to take up, and not an inch more. He had not sat down since walking in 40 minutes ago, despite the fact that the dog, Rex, according to the intake form, Brandon had managed to slide across the desk without approaching, had a wound on his left rear flank that needed immediate attention. "He'll bite," Hatch said, not as a warning, as a statement of fact, the same way someone might say the floor is wet or that bridge is out. Matter of fact, final. "He's bitten 3 people in the last 6 months. I'll tell you right now so you don't get any ideas." Maren looked at him. Then she looked at Rex. Rex was still watching her. "What happened to his flank?" she asked. "Wire fence. He went through it. How long ago?" 3 hours. She glanced down at her clipboard, then back up. "And you waited 3 hours?" Something shifted in Hatch's expression, not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it. The base clinic couldn't see him. "I had to drive." There were things Maren wanted to say to that. She kept them in the clipboard-shaped space in front of her chest and said instead, "I need to get closer to assess him. I'm going to move slowly. I just told you. I heard you." She was already moving. Not fast, not performing calmness, just genuinely calm the way she'd learned to be in rooms like this. "I've been doing this for 8 years. I know what a dog looks like when it's about to bite, and I know what a dog looks like when it's in pain. Rex looks like the second one." Hatch's grip tightened on the leash. "Lady, I'm serious. He took a chunk out of my CO's arm 6 months ago. He's been cleared for deployment twice and pulled back both times. He's a liability. That's the word they used. A liability. The word came out clipped, bitten off, like it had been swallowed and brought back up. I'm the only person he tolerates, and barely." Maren stopped about 4 feet away from the dog. Rex lifted his nose. She didn't move toward him. She crouched down slowly, getting below his eye level, and waited. This was the part that took patience, the part that Brandon, young and quick and still operating on adrenaline, hadn't learned yet. You didn't go to the animal. You made yourself available, and you let the animal decide. The waiting room was quiet enough that she could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Somewhere behind the front desk, Brandon had stopped breathing audibly. The clock on the wall read 11:47 p.m. Rex put one paw forward. "Don't," Hatch said, low and sharp. She didn't know if he was talking to her or to the dog. Rex put his nose 6 inches from her outstretched hand and inhaled. Maren stayed completely still. She'd learned this once from a woman named Dr. Osi Bonsu, who'd run a wildlife rehabilitation center outside of Fort Bragg during the one summer Maren had spent there between her second and third year of vet tech school. You don't reach for them, Dr. Osi Bonsu had told her. You become the kind of stillness they recognize. Then you let them come to you. It had seemed at the time like something you'd put on a motivational poster. It had taken Maren 3 years of actual practice to understand that it was just true. Rex exhaled against her palm. She heard Hatch make a sound behind her. Not a word, just a sound. The dog let her touch him. She ran her hand slowly along his neck, his shoulder, down toward the flank, reading him as she went, the flinch points, the places he tensed, the places he didn't. He was trembling slightly. Not from the cold. From the effort of holding himself together, she thought. From the effort of being an animal that had been classified as a liability and had been carrying that classification in his body like a second injury. He needs stitches, she said. The wound's deep. I want to flush it and get a better look under better light, but from here I can tell it hasn't hit anything major. He's going to be okay. She said the last sentence to the dog, not to Hatch. There was a long pause. You can't take him back without me, Hatch said. The authority was still in his voice, but something underneath it had shifted, the way the ground shifts after a long rain, not gone, just resettled. He won't go. He can come with you, Maren said. She stood slowly, keeping her movements smooth. I'll need you in the room anyway. He'll do better if you're there. She turned then and saw Hatch's face for the first time straight on, without the buffer of the dog between them. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't immediately place. It wasn't the smirk she'd caught when she first walked in. That reflexive dismissal that men like him sometimes wore like a second uniform, the one that said another civilian who thinks they understand. That was gone. What was there instead was something more complicated and less comfortable, the look of a man who had been certain about something and had just been made uncertain, and didn't yet know what to do with the feeling. He's never done that, Hatch said. Not accusing. Just saying it, like he needed to say it out loud to make it real. I know, Maren said. Let's get him fixed up. The treatment room was small and bright and smelled like antiseptic, and the particular kind of calm that Maren had spent 8 years learning to produce in rooms like this one. Rex lay on the padded table with his chin on his paws, watching her work. Hatch stood at the dog's head with one hand resting on his neck. Not restraining, Maren noticed, just present, just there. She cleaned the wound with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 10,000 times, which she had approximately. She talked while she worked, not to Hatch, not really, but in the direction of the room, the low, steady commentary that she used with all the animals. There you go. This is going to sting for just a second. You're okay. You're doing good. Rex's tail moved once. A single slow sweep. She heard Hatch's breath catch. How long has he been working? She asked. 6 years. A pause. He's been with me for 4 of those. She nodded, threading the first suture, and the biting started. When after Kandahar? She didn't ask what happened in Kandahar. In 8 years of working nights in vet clinics within 30 miles of military installations, she'd learned that after Kandahar and after Fallujah and after the 3rd deployment were complete sentences. They didn't require a follow-up question. They were their own answer. He was fine before, Hatch said, unprompted. Completely fine. Decorated twice. His handler before me, guy named Taft, retired out, said he'd never worked with a better dog. Then we came back and everything just. He stopped, started again. They kept saying it was behavioral, that he'd been trained too hard and needed to be retrained. They sent him to 3 different programs. He bit every single trainer. Did they check him for a TBI? The silence that followed was very specific in quality. She'd heard that silence before, in different rooms, from different people. It was the silence of someone encountering a question they hadn't known to ask. They said dogs don't get TBIs, Hatch said finally. Maren tied off the suture. They do. Not in the same way, but they do. Blast exposure affects them neurologically the same way it affects humans. It can cause light sensitivity, sound sensitivity, aggression responses that look behavioral but aren't. It can cause chronic pain that the animal can't communicate except through behavior. She paused, looking at Rex, who was watching her with those steady amber eyes. Did he ever get a full neurological workup? Another silence. No, Hatch said. No, they said he was unstable. That's the word. Unstable. They were going to retire him. Retire him, meaning put him down. The words came out flat, stripped of everything. I put in the paperwork to take him myself. They said I could if I wanted to, but they wouldn't cover any vet costs because as far as they were concerned, he was a liability and any expenses incurred. He stopped. I've been paying out of pocket for 18 months. Maren looked up then. Hatch wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Rex with an expression that she recognized because she'd seen versions of it before on other faces, in other rooms, at other hours of the night. It was the expression of someone who had made a decision that cost them considerably and had never once considered making a different one. She looked back down at her work. I want to refer you to a veterinary neurologist, she said. There's one in Raleigh I've worked with before. She's done a lot of work with service animals, specifically with blast exposure cases. I can't promise anything, but if what I'm thinking is right, if Rex has been reacting to pain and neurological disruption rather than aggression, then there may be treatment options that nobody's told you about. Hatch was quiet for a moment. Why are you? He started, stopped. Tried again. Why are you telling me this? You don't know me. You don't know him. Maren tied off the final suture and set down her tools. She looked at Rex, who looked back at her with that same unhurried, assessing attention he'd given her in the waiting room. That same question in his eyes, now with a tentative answer in it. Because somebody should have told you 8 months ago, she said, and they didn't. It was Brandon who walked in 20 minutes later, clipboard in hand, to deliver the paperwork. And it was Brandon who came back out 2 minutes after that with the expression of someone who had witnessed something he wasn't sure how to categorize. The dog is just laying there. Brandon said to the receptionist, keeping his voice low, like completely relaxed. Hatch is sitting next to him on the floor, and they're both and she's talking to them both, and the dog keeps. He shook his head. She's something else, man. In the treatment room, Maren was explaining the neurological referral to Hatch, who was sitting on the floor next to the table with Rex's head in his lap, the leash looped loosely over his knee. She was explaining it the same way she explained everything, directly, without decoration, with the assumption that the person across from her was capable of handling the truth. The appointment can take up to 2 hours, she said. They'll do imaging, reflex testing, the full panel. Dr. Yamamoto, that's the neurologist. She'll want a full history, so if you can bring whatever documentation you have from the military, that would help. He won't go with anyone else, Hatch said. He wasn't arguing. He was just thinking out loud, the way people did when they were processing information that was bigger than they'd expected to receive at midnight on a Tuesday. You'd be there, Maren said. Yeah. He looked down at Rex. Rex's tail moved again, that same slow, deliberate sweep. Yeah, I would. There was a pause that was different from the earlier pauses, more settled somehow, less load-bearing. Can I ask you something? Hatch said. She nodded. You knew he wasn't going to bite you when you walked in. Before you even came close, you already knew. It wasn't quite a question, but she answered it like one. I thought it was likely. I wasn't certain. How? Maren considered this. It was the kind of question that had a complicated answer and a simple one, and she'd learned that the simple one was usually the more honest. I've spent 8 years reading animals that can't talk to me, she said. You get good at looking for the thing underneath the thing. Rex wasn't showing me aggression. He was showing me that he'd been in pain for a long time and he was exhausted and he wanted someone to just deal with it, handle it, without making it worse. She paused. That's a look I know. Hatch studied her for a moment. You were military, he said. It came out as a statement, not a question. The same way his earlier words had come out, not with certainty exactly, but with the particular confidence of someone who'd gotten good at reading people the same way she'd gotten good at reading animals. She tilted her head slightly. What makes you say that? The way you move, he said simply. The way you came into the room. You weren't performing calm. You just were. And the way you didn't flinch when I said he'd bitten people. Civilians flinch. Even the professionals. You just filed it and kept moving. There was a version of this conversation she'd had before, in different forms, with different people. She'd learned that it could go several ways from here. She chose the honest version. I was, she said, Army. 4 years, 2 deployments, separated as a sergeant. I worked with working dogs in theater for 2 of those years. Not as a handler, as medical support. I was the one they called when a canine came back from a sweep with injuries. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence again. Hatch looked at his dog. Rex was looking at Maren. "He knows," Hatch said quietly. Not surprised exactly, just seeing it, finally. The shape of something that had been there all along. He knew when you walked in. He could smell it. He knew you'd been around dogs like him. "Probably," she said. "Animals remember things we think they can't. Scent is memory for them. He might not know the specific story, but he knows something about what I am, what I've been around." Hatch was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed in a way that was small but unmistakable. Something in it had loosened, the way a knot loosens when you stop pulling and just work it gently. "I've been telling everyone he's dangerous," he said. "Every vet office we've been to, every groomer, anyone who came near him. Because that's what they told me he was, and I figured if I said it first, at least, they couldn't say I didn't warn them." He stopped. I think I've been protecting him wrong." Maren didn't say anything. "I think I've been saying he bites because that's what I was told, and I believed it because it felt safer to believe it. Safer for him and safer for me. If he's dangerous, then I'm not asking anything of him. I'm not expecting anything." He looked up at her. "But that's not what he is." "No," she agreed. "It's not." Rex exhaled a long, slow breath and closed his eyes. His head stayed in Hatch's lap. His tail swept once more, then settled. The three of them stayed like that for a moment, in the bright, quiet room, the dog sleeping, the man sitting on the floor, the woman standing near the counter with 8 years of night shifts behind her, and whatever came next in front of her. She walked them out at 12:47 in the morning. The waiting room had emptied while they were in the back. The only person left was the night receptionist, who was doing something on her phone and looked up when they came through the door and then did a visible double take at Rex, honking calmly at Hatch's side, ears relaxed, head low. Hatch stopped at the door. He turned and looked at Maren with an expression she'd need a few more hours to fully parse, something between gratitude and the specific kind of acknowledgement that people who have been humbled give to the thing that humbled them. Not embarrassed exactly. More like recalibrated. "I was rude to you," he said. "When I came in, you were worried," she said. "That's not an excuse." She almost smiled. "No, but it's a reason." He held her gaze for a moment. Rex sat next to his leg, patient and still, watching the parking lot through the glass door. "I'll call Dr. Yamamoto's office when it opens," Maren said. "I'll leave a note with the referral information. You should get a call by end of day tomorrow." Hatch nodded. He looked like he was going to say something else, then decided against it, then said it anyway. 8 years of doing this on nights. Why nights? She thought about it. "Nights are quieter," she said. "The emergencies are real. Nobody comes in at midnight because they're not sure if something's wrong. If they're here, something's wrong, and they know it, and we both know what we're dealing with. There's no pretending." He nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something. "Yeah," he said. "I know that feeling." He pushed through the door and into the dark parking lot, Rex walking at his heel, and Maren watched through the glass until they reached the truck, a battered dark blue pickup, the kind that got dirty and stayed that way, and Hatch opened the passenger door, and Rex jumped up. And Hatch stood outside for a moment, with his hand on the doorframe, not looking back, just standing in the November air in the empty parking lot at 12:48 in the morning. Then he got in the truck. She watched the taillights until they turned out of the lot and onto the road. Brandon appeared at her elbow. "Can you restock the suture kit in room 2, she said. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, of course." He started to go, then stopped. He looked scared when he came in. Hatch, not the dog. Him. Maren picked up the clipboard she'd set on the front desk and clipped the referral note to the top of Rex's file. "I know," she said. Brandon waited a beat, then went to restock the suture kit. The referral went through on Wednesday morning. On Thursday, Dr. Yamamoto's office called Hatch. On the following Monday, Rex had his first full neurological workup, imaging, reflex panel, sensory response testing, the complete picture that nobody had thought to take in 6 years. The results came back 2 weeks later. There was damage, mild but present, consistent with repeated blast exposure at close range. There was also a spinal compression in his lower back, likely from a jump gone wrong somewhere over the last 4 years that had never been identified or treated. The neurologist's assessment was careful and specific. Rex had been operating through chronic pain for an estimated 18 to 24 months. The aggression responses had not been behavioral. They had been pain responses. He had been biting people because people kept touching the places that hurt, and he had no other way to ask them to stop. Hatch called the clinic on a Friday evening and asked for Maren. The receptionist put him through to the back. "You were right," he said when she picked up, "about the neurological thing, about all of it." "I know," she said. There was a short pause. She could hear faintly through the phone the sound of a dog's slow breathing. "He's on medication," Hatch said. "The spinal thing is treatable, Dr. Yamamoto said with physical therapy and the pain management protocol, he could have his quality of life significantly improved within 6 months. Another pause. She used the word significantly. I wrote it down. "That's good," Maren said. "That's really good." "He let me brush him this morning," Hatch said, and then said nothing else for a moment. And in that moment, Maren understood that this was not a small piece of information. That in the context of everything that had happened, the biting, the liability designation, the 18 months of out-of-pocket vet bills, the weight of a decision that had cost him and that he'd never once questioned. A dog letting himself be brushed without flinching was a large and specific thing. "He's been in pain for 2 years, Hatch said, "and I didn't know. I kept thinking it was something I'd done wrong, or something in him that was just broken. I kept thinking I wasn't enough to fix it." "You weren't supposed to fix it," Maren said. "You were supposed to find it, and you did. You drove 3 hours to a vet clinic at midnight because you were paying out of pocket and you knew something was wrong." She paused. "That's the whole job." Hatch was quiet. Then, "I want to bring him in when he's better. When he's fully through the PT. I want you to see him." "I'd like that," she said. She would. He came back on a Thursday afternoon in late March, which Maren was not scheduled for, but had come in to cover for a colleague who'd gotten sick, which was the kind of thing that happened on nights and on days, and in all the gaps between them when you worked the job long enough, and the job was also something you chose. Rex came through the door ahead of Hatch. He walked in the way dogs walk when they are not in pain, loose-limbed and interested, nose working the air, ears slightly forward, taking in the room. He spotted Maren at the front desk before Hatch had finished coming through the door, and he crossed the waiting room in 6 steps and pushed his nose into her hand with a deliberateness that was entirely different from the questioning, careful nose touch of that November night. This was a greeting. This was recognition. This was an answer to a question that had been asked and asked again, settled now in the particular way that some things settle, not because they had been resolved by force, but because the right person had taken the time to look for the right thing. Maren crouched down. Rex put his chin on her knee. Hatch stood in the doorway with the leash loose in his hand and watched the two of them, and his face was open in a way that faces are open when something is healed. Not fixed, not perfect, but healed and moving forward on its own and ready. "He remembered," Hatch said. Maren had her hand on the back of Rex's neck, and Rex's tail was moving in long, steady sweeps, unhurried, like he had all the time in the world. "He never forgot," she said.